The Consort Tournament by Watermelon's Melon Felon. Chapter 11. Voldemort is on a first-name basis with Harry. James sat stiffly as his wife began the usual family meeting. Since Harry was going to be coming home for Easter, they wanted everyone to be on the same page, so to speak. So Lily had decided to tell Remus and Sirius of what they had learned about Harry and his relationship with the Dark Lord. Remus, I might even go so far as to say that your comment about flirtation seemed to be right on the mark. They were talking as if they had been best friends for years. Harry got cheeky several times, and the Dark Lord merely laughed in response.
Remus shifted in discomfort while Sirius's eyes narrowed. What did they talk about?
The grim animagus demanded. Lily sighed and looked to James, who also sighed. He convinced Voldemort to give MacDougal the punishment the law states he should serve. He was just going to have the boy tortured until he felt that he had suffered enough. Harry managed to talk him out of it.
That's good, Remus said, looking confused. It doesn't sound too bad. In fact, the fact that he relented at all surprises me.
Lily snorted. It gets worse quickly. Our Harry immediately comments on how if the boy went missing once he was released, then there was nothing he or the Dark Lord could do about it. And the grin that spread across Voldemort's face.
She shivered.
It was unnatural.
Are you sure it was Harry? Sirius asked, looking worried. That doesn't seem like something he would say.
Lily winced and shook her head. No, Harry has trouble with people. In his eyes, torturing animals and creatures is worse than torturing people or children. His only concern about the Hufflepuff was how it would ruin Voldemort's reputation among the younger masses if they witnessed him flouting his own laws simply because he's the Dark Lord and can do as he pleases. There was no concern for the boy.
None, James added with finality. I know he's a bit off at interacting with people he doesn't know and seems a little desensitized to the plights of people he doesn't know or care for, but it was just shocking.
Lily sighed once more. Harry connects with animals and creatures due to an inborn ability of his. It explains why he gravitates towards them more than people. And for years I had always known that Harry held little love for humanity, especially with how they treat the beings he adores most. I even scolded him in a recent letter over how he needed to pay more attention to danger and just what the danger could affect. I always knew, but having it confirmed verbally is what has left me astounded. As if it makes it more real to see and hear it with my own eyes. The table was silent for several moments. Remus was eyeing them carefully, looking for something. James felt too tired to really give much more to the conversation. He loved his son. Harry was the only child they had. They had tried for more, but nothing seemed to work, so they doted upon him whenever they could. James liked to think that he was a good father, and it kind of hurt that Harry felt the need to hide some of his personality simply because he thought he wouldn't be accepted. Sure, James had been a tosser in school. He'd been prejudiced and hard-headed and probably the worst bully to pass through the school doors. Lily had to seriously train his ways out of him. When she and Snape had their fight that day after their owls, she had ended their friendship. James had thought that made Snape fresh meat, but no. Lily tore into him and gave him detention for the rest of the year, making him miss every remaining Quidditch match and Hogsmeade weekend. And she personally supervised the detentions, making him write out definitions of words hundreds of times until he memorized them. James would never forget the meanings of abuse, assault, and bullying. He would never forget the 10-foot essay she had assigned him to do about how wrong it was to brutally attack someone simply because he didn't like their house or the fact that they were friends with the girl he wanted. She forced him to write essays about children from the different houses being bullied the same way he bullied Snape. Little Gryffindor and Hufflepuff first years who were known to be slightly rude like Snape came across as. And he was forced to write out the various pranks he and his friends had done on Snape, but replaced Snape's name with the name of another student. And that was how he'd been forced to realize that it was not okay, that they were not just pranks, that stripping someone of their clothes without their permission was not just normal harassment. He never would have done such a thing to a girl because it would have been considered sexual assault. And Lily had been the one to tell him that it was no different to do it to a boy. That it was still the same kind of assault, and that the gender of the person it happened to didn't matter. James didn't get on with Slytherins much, nor did he often show Hufflepuffs the respect they deserved, but he at least was better now.
It took years, but he was finally of a manageable state of mind in regards to the two less respected houses of Hogwarts. He was a different man now, and it hurt that he'd made his son feel as if he wouldn't have been accepted if he'd gone to Slytherin. Harry hated loud people, and Quidditch, and partying. Gryffindor reveled in all three. For all James knew, Harry had been stuck in a house he detested, also he wouldn't have to experience the same treatment Sirius had from his family for being the odd one out. "He was supposed to be a Slytherin!" Sirius's voice broke through James's thoughts. Sirius looked ready to rebel, but Lily cuffed him upside the head.
And there is nothing wrong with it. He's still Harry. He's always been more observant and manipulative than most children. And he still does incredibly Gryffindorish things. Gryffindor was the second house the Sorting Hat had chosen, so there is obviously some recklessness and courage in there somewhere.
Remus sent Sirius a look, and the Black Lord backed down immediately. "Come on, Moody! It just doesn't seem like he'd be a Slytherin." "Or we all had expected him to go to Gryffindor and didn't even consider that he would be good in any other house. Face it, Padfoot, we saw what we wanted to see." The four adults were quiet for the rest of the dinner, if only because they now had much to consider.
"The boy has fallen."
Albus gave a nod, though his demeanor was much more uplifting than Gellert's.
"It's good. For years I had labored under the impression that he would be unable to love or be loved because of how he was created. But perhaps I was wrong, and I can't even tell you how much I hope I was."
Gellert gave a grunt of acknowledgement. Voldemort's presence had filled the fortress, alerting them both that he was on his way, and it was not the usual time for him to visit. He usually came on the anniversary of his defeat of Dumbledore. For him to have come early must have been serious. The man looked calm when he rounded the corner. Albus was struck by how old Tom looked despite his ever-youthful appearance. Even his serpent familiars seemed to be exhausted on this day.
"Tom, are you well?"
The young man sent him the customary annoyed look. At least he was relatively okay if he could muster up enough anger over being called by his true name. "I am fine." He wasn't, but Albus knew from experience that Tom wasn't one to talk about his troubles.
"The reason for your visit?"
"It's been nearly 20 years, Albus. You understand the significance." And he did, once he considered the date. He'd been in prison for 20 years with his magic bound. It was enough time, according to Tom, to have completely changed the foundations of magical Britain, and if Albus attempted to reinstate change in what little life he had left, it wouldn't do much.
"Am I to be released into the public once again?"
He didn't miss Gellert's glitch at the mention of it. They didn't really like to discuss the future much, and had both chosen to ignore it for as long as possible. "Possibly," the current Dark Lord muttered, eyeing both bound wizards with a calculating gaze. "I have full control over you, Albus. You'd walk free on the 8th like you are meant to. But you don't want to be free if it means being alone. Correct?" Tom's eyes laid heavily upon Gellert's form. "I do not have control over you," he said to the man. "I could get it easily, but your release alongside your lovers would fracture the delicate treaties I've drawn up with the 11 countries you assaulted, and they would be most displeased should you go free. Albus did not kill anyone, and he was simply placed in a glorified nursing home with his lover and best friend. His freedom would mean nothing to anyone. But yours—" Tom trailed off, not needing to say anything else to get his point across. And Albus was astonished at what the implication in Tom's words were. Tom understood that Albus would not wish to be free from Nurmengard if it meant being without Gellert. Because what else would he have to do with the remaining life he had left? He was nearly 12 decades old. He was very near the end, and spending those last years alone would be terrible. And Tom was giving him a choice. A very deeply buried one, but it was still there. Accept his release and spend his last days in sadness, or remain with Gellert.
"Why are you so understanding, Tom? What happened to make you realize just how detrimental this would be to both of us?"
The younger wizard stared him down, his patience not as strong as Albus's was. He gave in several moments later, when Albus did nothing but stare. He hadn't even blinked yet. A few weeks ago, Harry James Potter collapsed from being dosed with a poorly tweaked love potion. Severus was so enraged because it was borderline poison and a step below an imperious. I was unable to reach him until the proper antidote had been created, and I realized that I did not like that.
How did you learn of his collapse, Tom?
I was sitting with him in the Three Broomsticks when it happened. The Dark Lord quipped.
So much to consider. Tom liked the young Potter. Why else would he enter the boy into his tournament? But the fact that he actually went to the Three Broomsticks, which Tom had never favored, just to sit with the young man spoke volumes. Also, someone he at the very least admired was attacked in essence right in front of him, and he hadn't been able to predict it. And not just that, but was something that Tom detested with every fibre of his being. Love potions. And then, to not be able to pull Mr. Potter out of the throes of the potion with his own power must have been a great attack to Tom's pride. Tom was learning to care about someone. It was taking time. He didn't just wake up and suddenly become emotional over someone he was a little smitten with. How often did Harry Potter and Tom Riddle talk? How often were they within each other's scope? What was the boy like when he and Tom were alone?
What is Mr. Potter like, Tom?
Cheeking,
the man said with a wistful smirk on his face.
Skilled, intelligent where it matters, much too generous in certain situations.
That last one was mumbled, a slightly frosted look seeping into his games. Albus took advantage of Tom's chattiness while he could.
What is wrong with being generous?
Tom sent him a knowing look, but actually deigned to answer anyway.
He managed to convince me to just give the Hufflepuff responsible for his illness the usual week in Azkaban. I wanted to torture him and then possibly kill him, but Harry said that me breaking my own laws would lower my regard in the eyes of his fellow young adults.
Tom was even allowing himself to be influenced by the child. It was a much more interesting development than he had hoped. Perhaps Harry James Potter was what Tom needed in order to finally be himself. That Tom actually allowed himself to be talked down from what he loved was a miracle. It also proved that there was hope. This had to mean that Albus's assumption over his ability to love because he was born under forced love was wrong. It had to be.
The young man did his time then, as he left Mr. Potter alone.
Knowing Tom, he would be protective and jealous most likely. He still seemed annoyed despite it happening a few weeks ago.
Tom's sadistic grin nearly mangled his false face, making the handsome features he wore twist obscenely.
Mr. McDougal went missing the day of his release.
Gellert snorted.
I did that a few times myself.
Albus was very displeased and was prepared to scold Tom when the brunette raised a quelling hand. For your information, Harry suggested that if he were to go missing after he'd served his sentence, then there was nothing any of us could do about it. I get the revenge I want and keep my appearance intact at the same time. Albus was staggered by the information and had to let Gellert help him to sit because he honestly
Hadn't expected that.
The boy may be a Gryffindor and have some of their traits, but he was supposed to be Slytherin first, Albus. And honestly, I don't blame him for wanting revenge. Harry is a young man of action, though he would prefer if others handled the revenge for him. He isn't that malicious. This doesn't make him a bad person. In fact, I'd say it makes him human. Not everyone wants to be the epitome of good, Albus, and to teach young children that it's all they should strive for in life is reprehensible. Some of us don't want to be happy and kind all the time. The moment you stop judging others and their ethics based solely upon your own beliefs and experiences is the moment you will truly understand the way the minds and hearts of other people truly work. Tom turned then, and as he walked away, he said, I will return in July. You will tell me your decision come then. He left in a plume of black smoke that flew right through the window in the corridor. For several minutes, Albus merely sat in silence. Gellert sat across from him, watching him closely.
He has a point, you know.
Indeed.
The boy is learning. It will take time, but he is finally understanding that which was denied him these many years. And I think it's time that you realize that while you mean to do good and you mean to be kind, sometimes your ways to go about them aren't as you intend them to be. For the greater good was our motto once, Now I realize that it's basically an excuse for us to do as we wanted, and not feel as if anyone could truly blame us for our actions. By saying we were doing it for the greater good of the magical world, it seemed to make us exempt from any guilt that might come with our actions.
The elder gave a shrug.
Our dream was not as great as we thought it was, and our actions to achieve our separate versions of the same dream were not good either. We are flawed, and we plan to sacrifice anyone or anything to get what we thought was the right future. And I have come to realize that we were hypocrites. It's time you have as well. No error is human. We are humans. We make mistakes. We are not perfect. And we do not hold the right to judge others at their actions simply because we think our way is better. We will undoubtedly do it, but we shouldn't. But again, we are human.
His old friend placed his old and gnarled hand on Albus's shoulders.
Our time is over, Albus. Stop looking at everything through your rosy spectacles and realize that people have many facets to their personalities. And just because you don't like or agree with some, doesn't mean the person in particular is terrible and deserves reproach.
Fred opened the door to his and George's flat and promptly ducked. Someone had just swung for his face and almost landed a solid blow. "It's you," a young voice hissed. "Both of you." A more calm and monotone one added. Fred's wand was out in case whomever they were tried to start anything else. Before him stood two young teens. Very familiar teens. In fact, he shouldn't be surprised because they were the older twin brothers of one Regulus Change, the young man he and George were currently trying to woo. "Forge, what's the matter?" George asked from the kitchen. "We have visitors," he called back. George walked in and immediately hummed. "Oh!" "Yes," Serpents Lestrange nodded. "Oh." And then came the very long talk filled with promises, threats of dismemberment, the worst sort of course, and the occasional
Deadly glare.
I can't believe they are just allowed to do whatever they want.
Harry had once again taken the rune spore out for a day around the school. Since it was nearing the Easter Hall, classes had died away, leaving pretty much nothing to do but study. So Harry decided to take a walk and bring the lonely creature with him. The Severus head was throwing insults at everything, especially at the owls in the owlery. Harry had a feeling that he was jealous because a lot of the birds were birds of prey, but they were allowed to roam free because wizards knew how to contain them. Wizards were abysmal at containing magical creatures, though. Still, Harry tried to keep them content as much as he could. He let them slither around, and he fed them their favorite meals, a good rubbing for them, and then back to their cage some hours later. So Luna had looked to her right and said, "It shouldn't surprise you. They're so judgmental over creatures like us. But it isn't as if the featherbrains have it easier. They're used for manual labor and get no appreciation for it. At least we're exempt from that." Severus snorted. "Exempt because we're ignored." "Not true," Hermione countered. "The large one comes to feed us once a week and bathes us twice a week. He accepts us, as well as the green-eyed one." She is dipping her head in Harry's direction. "Hagrid is an outcast because he isn't fully human," said Luna. "So he would better understand creatures that are outcasted as well." "What about the green idiot?" Severus demanded. "Why does he pay us any mind?" Hermione's head bobbed. "Why does he pay attention to any of the animals around here? Even the dead ones that are used like pack mules. Because no one else does. Because he cares about us." There was a huff before the conversation ended, or rather they were interrupted by the sudden appearance of none other than Voldemort. Harry did not repress his groan of annoyance. While the man was interesting and could even be a good conversation holder, sometimes he was just too much to be around at once. Harry had limits to his ability to handle people. Animals and creatures were different. People wanted to
Socialize and talk, and they demanded things and were needy.
Harry didn't do so well around them because he honestly could not take too many at once, and
Shutting them out with acclimacy was tiring.
people were not his area of expertise, which was why he had so few friends who were humans.
Loud and obnoxious people like Ronald Weasley and his little sister Ginevra were too much,
Especially when they were together.
most Gryffindors were just too much.
Chatty people, loud people, stupid people, they were the types of people that Harry could not stand to be around. What was wrong with just curling up beside a nice crump and reading a book?
Why did people want to play games like Quidditch?
Harry just didn't connect well with other people. At least Voldemort was good at being quiet when he needed to be. Harry, the man began, staring at the rune spore that was wrapped very obviously around the teen's shoulders and neck. You do realize that one of the most deadly XXXX creatures to ever exist is wrapped around your body?
Yeah,
Harry said with a shrug.
they do this a lot.
Voldemort stared at him for several seconds, clearly gobsmacked over what he had heard. Harry knew that it was incredibly rare for people to let even normal snakes slither all over their bodies, and to see a magical serpent do so must have been shocking. But Voldemort was a Parselmouth, and he had a serpentine familiar, so he shouldn't be all too horrified like he looked. The rune spore did as Harry expected. They took umbrage to Voldemort's implied distrust. Severus reared up and let loose the most insulting vitriol that Harry had ever heard a serpent speak. You piece of human dung! How dare you insult me! I am above one such as your filth, and I demand that you reconsider your words, lest I inject you with my venom and make you writhe in incomparable agony. And Severus was not the one head to have been affected. Luna and Hermione were both looking Voldemort in the eye, glaring their beady red eyes at him. And Severus hadn't even finished. He was listing all of the various body parts he would gladly bite off first and bragged over how Voldemort would be unable to walk ever again. Harry had to wonder where a rune spore learned the word penis, especially since this one came from the Republic of Martius in Africa, and English was not the only language spoken there. In fact, he wouldn't expect the creature to understand human languages at all, because they had been taken from a forest where no humans resided. Anyway, Severus had finally finished enumerating what he would do to Voldemort's shriveled up penis. The Dark Lord was glaring heatedly at the creature, and Harry had to struggle to keep his mouth shut. He wanted to laugh. Not many had the audacity to get mouthy with the Dark Lord, and it was just so humorous to see the man so shocked over it. Hermione decided to add in a simple comment for good measure. You reek of arousal and bodily fluids that haven't been washed away yet. No one would even want to touch you. And that very nearly got a laugh out of him. The Dark Lord smelled aroused and was covered in bodily fluids. Still, what else could it mean besides having a good wank? The Dark Lord wanked. It was such a childish glee that filled him, and at the same time he didn't care how mature it was. He actually went behind closed doors and it really was a wank biscuit. Marlin, it was a glorious sight to behold, seeing the man who everyone respected and revered flushing brightly in response to the observation of a serpent.
My lord,
Harry murmured, trying to keep his cool and innocence.
are you well?
I'm fine, the older wizard insisted, though his mouth was extremely thinned out. It was so tight. Is this something you do frequently? The man went on to ask, trying to appear calm, but unable to really get it across because the rune spore was still spewing rude things now and then.
Some students have gotten used to them hanging around me while I work in the hospital wing,
Harry explained.
They're really very well behaved, and all they want is some time away from their cage. No animal or creature likes to be restrained, and I try to keep them all content.
Voldemort eyed him for a moment, both of them ignoring the changed words of the rune spore as they began to agree with everything Harry said. If it attacks a student, it will be beheaded. As Voldemort turned to walk away, Harry protested with a,
If a student attacks first, they won't need to attack in return. I'll have already dealt with their enemy by then.
He turned and stomped away.
The Dark Lord's familiar was more dangerous than a rune spore, yet he dared to act as if the creature was the worst thing to exist. There was a bloody basilisk beneath the school. No Severus was worse than that.
Severus Snape stared at the scene before him because he
Really didn't know what he should do. Hermione Granger was laying on the floor with Bellatrix Lestrange lying atop her. The two didn't look like they were doing anything questionable, but still. His student was alone with Bellatrix, and if that wasn't something to be alarmed about, what he heard once getting closer was enough to raise the hairs on his arms.
You have to feel it!
Bellatrix's high voice traveled through the room in a pitchy whisper. Her nails trailed along Granger's hair. The younger witch didn't seem fazed by something that would no doubt terrify many others. In fact, she seemed perfectly fine with the setup.
Feel it in your bones! Hear it echoing through your veins! See it behind closed eyes!
Bellatrix's hand, the one not buried in Granger's hair, was squeezing the young witch's wrist. Hard by the looks of it. Bellatrix, Severus intervened immediately. What are you doing to my students? Neither bothered to even look at him, which was insulting. Still, at least the Dark Lord's favorite follower bothered to answer him.
My little friend and I are discussing the intricate details of dark magic, Severus. I was explaining more in-depth feelings involved in casting some of the most powerful curses and rituals.
Severus made sure to look Granger over very carefully, determining that Bellatrix had indeed not volunteered her for anything. She seemed to be perfectly fine where she was.
Now, if you'll excuse us, Severus, we have a lesson to finish.
Bellatrix returned to her former mumbling, receiving the occasional nod from Granger. Severus remained long enough to witness Granger cast, wandlessly, the Grelore curse. It was a pain curse as well as a pleasure curse, riding the very fine line between both. It was self-inflicted and could only be cast on the caster. It was a more depraved type of dark magic. Severus was only slightly disgusted when his student, whom he had watched go from a young child and into a young lady, moaned in a very desperate manner. He turned tail and left, swiftly. It wasn't fleeing, it was just freeing his mind of the awkward image of his pupil in the throes of passion. He'd need some fire whiskey for this. The moans got progressively louder. So much whiskey. Harry nodded to himself. The scroll with a list of duels said that he would be facing off against someone named Marcus Belby. Marcus had been a Ravenclaw 1 year ahead of Harry, so he had already graduated. Harry was shocked he had made it this far in the tournament because he had never shown any kind of interest or effort in anything. But then again, he shouldn't be judging people. Still, the first round looked interesting. Task 5. Dueling. Round 1 matches. Hermione Granger versus Vita Lefay. Harry Potter versus Marcus Belby. Reginald Dubois versus Draco Malfoy. George Weasley versus Amelia Flint. Those were the matches to pay the most attention to, though Harry did plan to take note of everyone just in case. Still, he had to face someone around his own age, whom he had only faced in the dueling club once. And it was a swift end, with Belby barely getting a word in before he was disarmed. The man hadn't stood out in the competition, and there really wasn't much about him to find. And because Harry had never drawn out their duel, he didn't know anything about his dueling style. Seriously, Harry couldn't find much about him, and that was frustrating! How was he to prepare to face someone when he didn't know anything about them? The whole idea was nice, but Harry literally couldn't use it to his advantage because he hadn't paid enough attention to anyone besides his friends and Dubois, who was a threat. This meant he was essentially unprepared. Harry shrugged and slipped the scroll back into his trunk. He'd just have to figure it out as he went. He was good at reading body language, so perhaps he could just feint a lot and play on the man's fears. Hopefully, he would actually know about his second opponent.